President Cyril Ramaphosa says he will put the interests of South Africa first during his working visit to the United States. Ramaphosa is scheduled to meet with the United States President Donald Trump later on today at the White House in Washington, D.C. The meeting should start at around about 5:30 this afternoon. That's South African time. The state leaders are expected to discuss a range of diplomatic, geopolitical and economic relations between the two countries, including the punitive import tariffs introduced by Trump, the Russia-Ukraine war and the disinformation around genocide claims in South Africa, amongst many more issues, in fact. To discuss this further, we are joined by Sanusha Naidu, who is an associate researcher at the Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance, the University of Cape Town, and also by Dr Lebohang Pheko, who's a senior research fellow and political economist at the Trade Collective. Ladies, so good to have you. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
There's so much to get through and too much to discuss. So, Lebohang, let me start with you, and then we'll try and get through as much as we can. What does this meeting mean between the two presidents? I mean, it's finally happening because South Africa's diplomatic relations have been very strained with America since Donald Trump took his term.
Well, it's fair to say they've been strained before that, actually, Leanna. And I think we should go back to the Obama administration, where we had some skirmishes over the AGOA agreement. So this AGOA is not always been smooth sailing. And we've got a historically complicated relationship with the U.S., even pre-1994, when they were engaged in what they call constructive engagement under Ronald Reagan. So I think that we need to read this historically and also read it in the context of other geopolitical interest. Now, some people have said that this is also this is their disdain at the stand that South Africa has taken against the Israeli state at the ICJ. Bearing in mind, however, that currently the relationship between Israel and the U.S. is itself extremely strained. President Trump is not a person who his attention span for the aggression that's taking place in the Gaza Strip is very low, similar to his attention span for the situation between the Ukraine and Russia. He wants an end, and he's very unhappy with Benjamin Netanyahu's reticence in this and feels as though that relationship has been taken for granted. So I think that we also need to read this in the context that the geopolitical issues are much more complex than we would imagine, and also read it in the context of the struggle perhaps to get our resources and to gain a falling empire that wants to gain a foothold into one of the most important economies on this continent and indeed on the global south.
Yeah, it certainly is. And I mean, we can see what President Trump is coming in. I mean, he really is coming into this position, being America first. That's the way it is. No compromises, and that's how he looks at it. However, when the two come together, and Sanusha, let me bring you into this, is that conversations need compromises. So, do you think President Cyril Ramaphosa has the ability to take Trump's views and find the compromises and perhaps reset and revitalize these bilateral relations?
I think the challenge here for us is that very often we are looking at it from one perspective, that there has to be one that compromises and the other doesn't necessarily have to have any compromising positions. And that for me is quite difficult, because I think the challenge right now is we've been hearing a lot of megaphone narratives on this, what South Africa needs to do, how South Africa needs to compromise. But the challenge right now is, as my colleague has said, it's a declining superpower. It's a superpower that's trying to remain at the center and remain at the center of the universe. And really what is important here is that President Ramaphosa and the delegation and everyone else has had 100 and more days to look at the Trump presidency, to watch the way this presidency plays out, its strategic ambit plays out, its dynamics plays out, its kind of, it's a reality show in the making, and that's what it is. But the problem here is that inevitably you get to the White House. It's almost as if what's happening in certain quarters of Washington is that President Ramaphosa has been summoned. Now, this is not what it is. This is about an international relations discussion, and this is really each each president kind of, circling each other and watching each other in the Oval Office. And of course, the question is we must be much more respectful, whereas the other side doesn't have to play that same role. And I think that's the challenge. So what I think is going to happen today is South Africa is going to put its case forward around certain of the issues that is going to be discussed, whether it's on the trade, whether it's on the refugee question, whether it's the bad things that are happening in the South African political architecture and the domestic conditions. And then, of course, the question is, how does President Trump interpret it? If he chooses to remain within his context of the narrative, then that's it. We've done what we had to do, but we go on. And I think the challenge here is perhaps the issue is, let's not, the language of compromise means that there is an unequal relationship. But the problem here is that you're dealing with a White House administration that doesn't necessarily see everybody or kind of define compromise in the way that we do. So I think we've got to be careful of that. I think it's a cautious optimism that we have to think about.
Let's talk trade, because this is an important part of this conversation as well, which you've mentioned. So we talk AGOA, and AGOA expires this year. And as much as has been said about it, it is a very, very important topic that needs to be discussed. I mean, we're looking at 60,000 plus jobs that, are, thanks in a huge way to AGOA. I mean, there's so much trade, $3.6 billion in goods to the US under AGOA in 2023. And this hangs in the balance. And there have been assertions from the US that this is not going to happen, and that South Africa can almost kiss their involvement goodbye in all of this. But can we honestly afford it? And when I say afford it, it's also affording to change our stances with particular things. Lebohang, let me come to you, because, I mean, you get guys like Marco Rubio who've actively questioned whether South Africa deserves AGOA with its relations with BRICS, with its stance when it comes to Iran, its affiliation with China and Russia, which is obviously part of BRICS. But there are many issues that surround this. Talk to me about this.
So I think there are a few things. We also need to bear in mind that we have several other trading partners and several multiple trading relationships. This is a multipolar world, and I think the concern, which I share with Sanusha, is that this America first precludes the notion that there's also South Africa first, there's Zambia first, there's Nigeria first, there's SADC first, there's the African Union first, there's BRICS first. And I think in the contestations and the context of having many friends and having many geopolitical alliances, this is one among many. And I think that the other piece of that is that whether this notion, even the language of whether we deserve to be in the AGOA, I think South Africa has always viewed bilateral trade agreements and multilateralism as a part of economic diplomacy. We are not per se in need. We have minerals. We have several multiple resources at our disposal. And my concern and my challenge to us is to change our posture in this moment, because there's no doubt that the U.S. economy at the moment is tanking. We're looking at Donald Trump's popularity ratings, which are the lowest, I think, that for any American president in the last 80 years. He's not coming in there sort of from a position of great power. We should also bear in mind that we have at our disposal, the SADC is in support of our position. Several of the Islamic-speaking states across the world, notwithstanding the Gulf states, which have historical alliances with the U.S., problematically as that may be, we also have a huge opportunity to build our footprint within the BRICS, which represents already 40% of humanity. And I think that if we're looking more honestly at this, one of the earliest gripes that President Trump named was that, of course, the BRICS was a bone of contention. He clearly explicitly said that he wouldn't want to be trading with people who are in the BRICS and unless and who don't give preferential treatment to the United States. So there's lots of illogic and a lot of irrationality in the Trump tariff tips, as it were. And I think if we look at the geoeconomics of what is taking place, we can see that this is a slightly desperate regime. And I'm very concerned with the very apologetic and problematic and very reticent posture that many political economists and many people on both sides of the spectrum, both here and in the US, want us to approach this as though we are, with a begging bowl mentality. This is a multipolar world. The world is shifting. There are voices among voices. The US is an ally among many other allies. And I think that we need to bear that in mind. And this is an opportunity for us to look inwards at the African Union, at the BRICS, at the SADC, at the global South, and the many other alliances and economic opportunities that we have at our disposal.
I want to now bring Sanusha. I know I haven't got too much more time with you because I think you need to go in around 3 minutes' time. I want to talk about the rhetoric around white genocide in South Africa as well. We know this isn't true. I mean, this is misinformation. And, I as a white person am brave enough and talk the truth, because this is exactly what's happening in South Africa. In fact, I mean, when you look at statistics, statistics say that, farmers, 1% of farmers are killed. In South Africa, our crime rate is out of control. It's not against whites, it's against everyone. But the rhetoric is being spread by absolutely everybody, whether and I'm talking on the US side. Elon Musk being one of the biggest ones, and we know what's happening on X at the moment. We also have the whole Starlink issue coming into this. And one of my questions, and I think it's a very important one, because what precedent does it set if sovereign African states are seen to be negotiating not with a country, but with one of its billionaires? Because that's how it feels right now, with some reports coming out about Starlink and some deals that may be met with Elon Musk on the side when it comes to Starlink and Tesla.
Yeah, I mean, I think the optics and the image around that is quite disturbing. And more importantly, Leanne, I think the challenge is going to be what kind of discussions Elon Musk and President Ramaphosa will have this evening or around the Starlink, whether it's a Starlink engagement, an investment, whatever that means. It's going to actually provoke a reaction back home as well. And also bearing in mind that this was the person, Elon Musk, who kind of used X and other social media platforms and continuously put forward that white genocide narrative. Now, quite interestingly enough, Elon Musk is also facing much more important and if not a backlash in his Tesla sales. He had a Tesla meeting yesterday in terms of the sales. They're not doing well. We hear that the board is not very happy with him. So obviously this also is a pushback against him and his companies. But there's another side to this, and that is the geopolitics of economics. And this is where I think the geopoliticization of trade becomes quite interesting, because it's also about trying to move into a market where there are other competitors in the kind of satellite industry, whether it's the Chinese, whether it's coming from the Gulf states and so forth. And this is interesting because it circles back to a point that Lebohang made, and particularly this issue that we don't do business with countries that are in the BRICS. Well, hang on, President Trump just came back from the Gulf and he did quite big business with the UAE, which is a member of the BRICS, as well as Saudi Arabia, who's still sitting as an observer of the BRICS. And this is something that completely is not necessarily irrational, but it completely cancels out the narrative that is being peddled forward. And I think the same thing applies to Elon Musk. The bigger question would be how is this both received in terms of the public opinion and the kind of impact this will have in terms of somebody who took us to the brink of this kind of transformative, questioning the transformation agenda, questioning this issue around diversity, equity, and inclusivity, which is a big question in the US right now. And that is why you're seeing what is happening there in terms of this pushback against DEI, but also at the same time wanting to do business with us. And I think we need to see how those two lines blur in terms of whether it's about the narrative, whether it's about our kind of diplomacy, our kind of using the leverage, or is it about the business of business is business?
Absolutely. Sanusha, if you need to log off, you do that. We thank you for your time. I know you've got to run off to another interview, but thank you. We're going to continue for another 2 minutes or so. So if you want to stay, you can. But let me get to you, Lebohang, because we see now the Minister of Agriculture and the leader of the Democratic Alliance, John Steenhuisen, is going along on this particular trip. So this is going to be an interesting addition. What do you think his presence is going to do? Because obviously you putting in the whole farmer issue, and the minister happens to be a white man. He also happens to be the leader of the opposition party. Talk to me about this.
Look, those are good optics, aren't they? Those are really,
Very.
That's good politics and good politicking as well. Also bearing in mind that John Steenhuisen himself has rebutted the white genocide, terrible things discourse publicly. And I'm sure if Trump's people keep their eye on the internet, they will have seen that. The other thing, of course, is that the fact that he leads the ministry on the Department on Agriculture, which is the one that is ostensibly the most, this ostensible contestation around white farmers and so on. Useful symbolism there. And of course, it also speaks to the internationalization of our GNU going as a united front. Remember that a few months ago, the DA had her own bilateral meeting with the White House, which was deemed as very problematic. And I would say that it is problematic either in the GNU or you're in opposition entirely. But I think that this presents a useful stitching together of a united front. And of course, you're right. I mean, the white man as part of the delegation, those are very clear optics. And the other part of that is, of course, is whether it speaks to the notion of resonance. So whether or not it speaks to the notion of how to expose the 5 cabinet members. I think we're aware of these 5 former South African sort of disgruntled cabinet members, Elon Musk being the most prominent among them, but John Pollock, Lana Musk, David Sachs, and these tech boys, alumnus, and what that speaks to in terms of their own dissonance away from having been in this country for so long, and the juxtaposition between them and a John Steenhuisen is quite interesting.
It is going to be a very interesting day. Viewers writing in tell us how they feel. One of them is saying, this is golden brown skin, saying, we have the smartest president in the world. There's nothing that'll get by him. That'll be to be seen. Sanusha, thank you. Also, Lebohang, always a pleasure speaking to you. Ladies, great discussion. Wish we could have had more time, but this is where we come to an end.